Hey guys, welcome back to another week of Behind and Beyond. This week, I'm sitting down with Pastor Scott Stevens. We're going over his sermon from this past weekend. We're continuing in our Esther series. A few things you can expect to hear about in this week's episode. We have a really awesome, just practical conversation around spiritual habits, about how you form them, how you maintain them, and the importance of them in our spiritual life. We also dive really deep into a conversation about grit. It's a really cool idea about we get to define, we get to flesh it out. It's a bit of the sermon that didn't get to make it into the sermon that we all heard, so we get to kind of break that down a little bit deeper. Also, a note for everyone, Scott will mention a TED Talk and a grit test. It's a really cool resource, and we've actually linked it in the show notes in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. So if you're looking for those, be sure and check the description. I can't wait to get in the conversation, so let's get started. Welcome back, Scott. Good to have you here. How you doing?
Good.
Good. How was the weekend?
It was good.
Yeah?
I'm fighting some allergies. I don't know if anybody else is. I'm like dying.
Yeah.
Can't even
that time
breathe.
Of year. Yeah.
So all weekend, even during preaching, I was like, am I going to have like a coughing fit in the middle of this? But I got through.
Good. Yeah. You lived to tell the tale.
I did.
It's not a fun time of year, but the weather's turning a little bit, so we'll take it for sure. I know this topic in particular was really like heavy. There was a lot to cover, a lot that you got to cover, for people who maybe haven't never even looked at the book of Esther in this way, kind of like that we see it as that, little happy Bible story for kids that we talked about, but there's a lot more to it. So I'm sure you had a lot of content, stuff that didn't make it. What do you want to share now with a little bit of time that we have to dive a little deeper?
Yeah. I had one really big piece that didn't make it. Sometimes when you ask me that question, I'm like, I don't know, I got it all in. But like this, there's this concept of grit that like a year or two ago, I stumbled across some stuff on that word, on that concept, and it fascinated me. I like dug real deep into it, and I always thought like someday I think that's going to work in a sermon, and I thought like this was it, and it just, when I started writing and put it in, it was going to be too much to unpack, but I stumbled across this like grit test
Cool.
years ago.
Yeah.
And I took it, and I scored super high on it. That I've got like high grit, and but then it was attached to this TED Talk that intrigued me, and I listened to that, and I just thought it had some really interesting ties between faith and that word. I think when I first dug into it, it was more of a boxing thing, because one of the things they talk about is that boxers typically have this trait of grit, and in this TED Talk, this woman was talking about how they're trying to actually like test people for grit. Like one of the examples she used is a teacher that's going into a really difficult teaching environment that like teachers fail. They only make it a year. And they give this test, and then they were able to actually see who was more likely to succeed and get through that season. So yeah, like I think there's really interesting tie-overs to our faith there, because grit, they like one of the definitions is it's like this combination of hustle, passion, and perseverance. And I think sometimes in our faith, right, like it's easy to lose some of that passion, to sort of give up. What's the use? And if you've got grit when it comes to your faith, like just digging in and sticking with it, I think there's something there. So I was going to tie that into that, like, that concept of do the right things, do the hard things, do it day after day.
Yeah.
So there was something in there that I could probably talk about for a half an hour.
Yeah, that's
this concept.
That's really good. How do you see grit in your own life? Like, how have you developed it? Is it something that came more natural? Was it developed? Is it both?
Yeah. I think one of the things about grit they talk about is that it's like doing what you said you would do. And it's also not being distracted and going into other tasks. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think some people do something and then they want to like move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
The grit factor is this, like staying in that lane, staying in that pocket. And there's something about like boxing that deeply connects to that, because when you're in that ring, it's like lonely and it's just you, and grit is going to be what gets you through that round. It's real easy to just take a knee and tap out.
Yeah.
So and then the other concept was, if you heard, I talked about like living in a minority culture versus a majority Christian culture, and I think there's something there with like when we're in a majority Christian culture. I think it's easier to just sort of shrink back and not speak up and not say the hard things or do the hard things. And when we're in a minority Christian culture, you've got to have some grit to remain strong in your faith.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. So do you think people, like if you take a look at your life and you're like, everyone around me agrees with me, I'm not really being challenged, like, or I know one of your examples, like, I go to work and all my coworkers, like, they would just kind of make fun of me if I stood up for this. Like, I guess, how do we get really kind of granular with the grit? Like, what is our daily living that out look like for someone?
I think for me, one of the ways I live it out or think about it is, I'll give you an example. I was talking to somebody a little while back, and she was being very sincere that she has some folks in her life, family, that do not believe what she believes. And she goes, every single opportunity I get, I make sure I tell them about Jesus, and I make sure I tell them my stance. And when they're doing something that's sinful, I make sure I point it out. And I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure that's good strategy.
Yeah.
So like when it comes to like, for me, like living out that faith in culture, that's not my strategy.
Yeah.
But when asked, when confronted, I'll with grace tell you exactly what I think. And sometimes that'll rub, someone culturally the wrong way. But I think it's that grit to not shrink back in those situations. It's that say the right thing, do the right thing out of love, with kindness. I'm not going to slam somebody in that. But I don't like stick my nose into a conversation looking for the opportunity to bring up Jesus. I feel like God's bigger than that, and he'll provide the right opportunity. And I just like to sort of lay back and absorb and listen and learn and love. But ask me, or push me, and I'll say it. I won't shrink back in those situations.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember, like, people are noticing more than, we probably think they do. Or I don't know. I think that's, I think it's so cool when you do get to be on the other side of when you have that conversation with someone. I think it's so often they're like, I feel like the word different is always what comes up. They're like, I just kept watching you or listen to the way you talk or the way you live your life, and it's just different. And I think you're challenging us really well in that if we're living with the majority of our culture, we're not different. We're not salt and light. We're just, how would anyone see the gospel in us if we're just looking the same as everybody else? Yeah,
like grit too. It talks about it. She talked about this in that TED Talk. It's like sticking to goals. It's failure's okay. Like when you fail, that's okay. That's just going to set you up for future success. And it's not about grit's not about talent. It's really about like a mindset. Yeah. So in cultural situations, I'm not trying to win the argument. Like I'm not trying to. I'm just, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm thinking. Yeah. Love to have more conversation with you. Not trying to pick a fight. Yeah. But this is where I'm at.
That's so good. Yeah. That in itself is so countercultural, I think. Today people are just so, I think we see the world around us. We're like, if we want to be heard, we got to be louder. Yeah. We got to be more aggressive. We got to make our point known. But I think you're so right that I don't know if that's how
That's so
Jesus
good what you
it.
just said though, right there, because I think sometimes people want us as preacher, pastor, to get up on that platform and let them have it, and there are certain things from the platform that I don't think should be maybe necessarily not like talked about, but that should be aggressively. There are things. There's platform conversations, and then there's coffee table or across the conversations, and there's certain cultural things that I believe it's much more important for me to have that conversation in a conversation
Yeah.
around a table versus in a podium up front slamming away. I don't. So we take some heat sometimes, like, you need to be stronger on that. Well, like, yeah, I am, but this isn't the spot. I don't know what that person's sitting there going through or thinking, and then there's going to be a soundbite that someone's going to grab, versus a half-hour dialogue.
Yeah, in a relationship.
Yeah,
like that's what's missing. Is you can only
so good. Glad you said that. Yeah.
do so. Yeah, like there's a difference in our relational conversations and in a platform-focused context. But it doesn't mean like we're not shying away from anything. It's just knowing when and where. Yeah, it's huge.
Right.
And that's how Jesus did his ministry too. Like if we're looking back at that,
Exactly.
it's so he had sermons and he had, meals with people, and those are both so important in different ways for sure.
And when he was sharp with people, it was usually they were just like the religious leaders.
Yes, yeah.
He very seldom ever got sharp with anybody outside of them.
Yeah. One concept I really loved was this whole idea of habits. I think that's almost like a buzzword today. Like there's so much like content on building habits and change your life with this habit. And I would love to talk about the spiritual habits that you really challenged us to just seek out in our lives and make a difference in our daily habits. That is easy to choose the easy way out and be like, oh, I'll start that tomorrow.
Yeah.
How do you create healthy spiritual habits, and how have you seen them change your life?
That's so good. That's that line I had in this sermon there. It said, show me your habits and I'll show you your future. That's a Mark Batterson quote. Mark is the lead pastor down at National Community Church. I love his stuff. And I picked that up a while back. And then he actually came and spoke at Northway a little while back, and he said it there. So I jotted it down. I love that line. I think there's so much truth to that in like all aspects of life, right?
Yeah, totally.
Your job, your sports, your working out, your fitness, anything. But definitely in faith, right?
Yeah.
If you create really, really good habits. So, to me, there's these big habits. And so for me, like I try to, and some people can't do this with their job. I get it. Like I take these little study breaks at least a couple times a year where I just try to get away and reset and rethink. But I think for some people that could just be an afternoon.
Yeah.
But for me, it's usually sometimes 3 or 4 nights. That's like the more like the extreme end. And then like you start to back that up all the way down to to things like the habits that you try to put in place every day. So, alarm goes off and I have like a little prayer that I talk about, that I say before my feet hit the ground. And then I have little things that I'm doing throughout my day that are just become habits. And I sometimes like don't like to like give the specifics because they're my habits.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out your own. Like I know these people that like get up and they have daily devotionals. They get up at 5:15 and they spend till 6:15 like just in a quiet time with a book in their favorite spot in their house. And I can never do that. Like I don't know how people do that. But that's awesome. That's your habit. That's not mine. Like I have a moment where I'm in some scripture every single day that's not connected to anything to do with work. It's just stuff that I'm like reading on my own. That's a habit. I have multiple ones, but I think we do have to discover our habits. I have this one habit that I love that each day I sort of look at my schedule for that day, and I have like just a brief like prayer time over each specific meeting. Like, God, is there something that I'm supposed to know there, think there, say there? And it just sort of prompts me, gives me, sometimes I hear something like, say this, do this, or, oh, this is going to be difficult that you weren't seeing coming. And but sometimes it just then opens it up that I'm walking into that meeting, have already thought about it and spiritually sort of laid it down. So multiple habits, like those dailies, those weeklies, those monthlies, and then those like couple times a year. I think those are the type of habits that help us really, do the right thing and the hard things day after day.
So much of that, what I'm hearing, what you're saying is like even just awareness. and not just coasting through things and not just like existing and like, oh, I go through my day and these things just kind of happen. That's a good kind of like bit of wisdom to take too. It's like, okay, am I actually being aware of what God's trying to do in my life, or am I just breezing through it and just trying to make it to 5 o'clock? Like, I think there's such a difference in how you approach your day. Yeah. So I love that reminder of like,
I think if you have like certain things you do every day or certain things that happen consistently, like I wonder if you can't work one of those habits into there. I used to have a really long ride to work every day. Yeah. So we lived in the Homestead Munhall area. We're driving like up this way from the South Hills, and it was long. And so I incorporated some habits into that drive. Yeah. Now I don't, it's a quicker drive, so I had to eliminate that. But I work out pretty much every day. So I'll try to incorporate some of that. Like if I'm on the treadmill, might watch a sermon or might watch something or listen to something. And I watch a lot of stupid stuff like Sam the Cooking Guy whenever I'm on the trip and all kind of nerdy Netflix shows. But I also try to consistently each week be tuning. So it's like stuff that you're doing every day. Why can you incorporate some kind of a spiritual habit there into what you're already doing? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, totally. That's good. One other thing I'd love to talk about before we wrap up, if you want to touch on some of that Romans 8 stuff, I thought was really powerful. One, my like small group, we're going through a book actually just on Romans 8. Like it's like a whole book just on that chapter, because there's, so much, and I still feel like there's still so much to learn. So when you said that, I was like, oh, I love to talk about this. But I thought you brought up a really cool concept of, I think it's easy to read that verse about, the same power that raised Christ from the grave lives in us, but I'd never ask why. Yeah. I'm just like, yeah, that's great. I'm thankful. That's awesome. But I think you challenged us really well with, why does that power live in you? Because we were made to do hard things.
That's it.
And I thought that was really good. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but it was, how'd you get there?
I agree. Because I think sometimes whenever I hear that or whenever I read that, I almost think like, well, you're just exaggerating, Paul. Like, come on, that's like an over. You are way exaggerating. All right, we get it. We've got Jesus' Spirit in us. Come on, but like the same power that raised, like, I always think, I don't know. He's ramping that one up a little bit too much. But when you really think, I think that's why, because we're supposed to do hard things. Yeah. And if we're really going to go after big things of faith, or we are going to speak up when we need to speak up without being obnoxious, we need that same power in us. We need something supernatural. When we face incredible obstacles, or when we're in a moment where we're praying for someone that has a really bad diagnosis, like, man, I need that power. I can pray over this, but that power that raised Jesus from the dead is in me. Okay, well then I can pray over healing here. That child that has lost his or her way, and the parent is crying out, I really hope it works out for your child. That's my power. But to be able to pray over that child with the same power that, like, that can get it done. Yeah. That can turn that kid around. Yeah. So I can go through dozens of examples there. The person that is, absolutely opposes your beliefs and is in your face all the time. Why am I going to have this argument? But the power of Christ that raised him from the dead, that dwells in me, I can have a conversation with you. I can keep my cool. I can express, hey, I can't speak into your situation, but here's what Jesus did to me. Here's what he's done for me. Yeah. So it's there all the time if we tap into it. Paul's not exaggerating. He's not going over the top. There is no situation that you can't speak that grace and peace and truth into. Yeah. You can't, but the power that's inside of you that raised Christ from the dead can.
That's so good. Yeah. And just being aware of that and not just letting that roll off our shoulders, but let's let's recognize that. And I think that's such a thread of even what we've talked about today, of just these, like, we have this power of Christ in us. We have the ability to do hard things,
Yes.
to set these habits, and to, like, change people and show them the gospel. But it's just a question of, are we going to do it or let it just roll on by?
That's it.
Yeah.
It's good.
That's really good. Well, that's all we have for today, Scott. That was great.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for being here, as
Love it.
always. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks, guys, for listening, for watching. We'll see you next week.